and Pharmaceuticals in association with Higher Secondary Principals Forum.
Hi friends, welcome to the political science class brought to you by Prudent Media. I am LUIZA PEREIRA, teacher from Raghuvir and Premavati, Salkar Higher Secondary School, Chorao. Today I am here to explain to you chapter number 7 from your political science textbook, part 1. The name of the chapter is Security in the Contemporary World. Now, this chapter, Security in the Contemporary World, carries only 3 marks. And if you see the model paper of the board exam, only one question appears from this chapter. That doesn't mean that this chapter is not important. This chapter is very important from the general perspective. Now, to start with the chapter, the first thing what we should know is what is security. Now, security implies freedom from threats, from dangers. If we see around, we have threats, dangers coming from the enemies, from our neighbors. We have threats from the relatives, from our friends. We have environmental threats. We have health threats. So does this mean that we have to protect it or secured from all these threats? No. When we talk about security from threats, it is those threats which are extremely dangerous, which damages the core values which are beyond repairs. So in short, security implies threats or freedom from threats, okay, which endangers our lives. Now, if you have a look at the screen, I have divided the security into 2. That means there are 2 kinds of securities. And you should have a clear picture of this image in front of you. Try to put it in your mind, because until and unless you have a clear picture of this division, it will be difficult for you to understand this chapter better. Once you put this in the mind, it will be very, very easy for you to understand. So on the screen, if you see, there are 2 kinds of securities. One is the traditional notion of security, and the second one is the non-traditional notion of security. Now, when we talk about the traditional notion of security, it means it is traditional. It is there from the past, for last many, many years, and the governments or the countries are aware of this. Going to the non-traditional notion of security, it is non-traditional, meaning it is not there right from the beginning. It is not there for the last many years, but it is a modern thing. It is there in modern times. Or even if it was there in the past, the governments or the countries did not consider it as a threat, but now they have realized, okay, these are the threats. And that is why it is known as a non-traditional notion of security. Now, going back to the traditional notion of security, if you see the screen, I have divided it into 2. That is, the traditional notion of security can be further divided into 2. One is the external traditional notion of security, and the other one is the internal traditional notion of security. When we talk about the external traditional notion of security, we talk about the threats, dangers that come from outside. That is, here the source is the other country. Okay? And when we talk about the internal traditional notion of security, we talk about the threats within our country or within the country. So, internal means it is a threat within the country. External means it is a threat from outside, from the other countries. Now, the external can be further divided. External notion can be further divided, or what comes under external traditional notion of security, let us see. We have the military threats, as I told you, it is a threat from the other country. So when the military of the other country attacks attacks your country, it is called as a military threat to your country. So here the source is outside. I will deal with this in detail later on. First, let us see what comes under the external traditional notion of security. So once a country attacks your country, you have three basic choices. Now, which are these three basic choices? You have one option or one choice where you can surrender yourself. The second option is to prevent the war. And the third option is to defend or to protect. I will be dealing in detail later on with this. When we talk about the internal traditional notion of security, it is a threat within the country. And what are the threats that the government or the country face within the country? One of the threats are the communal riots. The riots taking in place because of various religions where two communities belonging to two different religions are involved. And India is known for communal riots. We have seen so many communal riots taking place in India between the Hindus and the Muslims, which is the biggest threat to our country. Then you have the ethnic conflicts. In chapter number 5, when we did security in the contemporary world, we spoke about the ethnic conflicts in Sri Lanka, where there was a conflict between the Sinhalese, who are the majority, and the Tamilians in the minority. So it is rather a group conflict. And then you have the other type, that is the separatist movement, wherein some of the states within the country are not happy with their government because their demands are not fulfilled, and so they want to be separated from the country. Again, if you see in India, we have this problem in India where so many states are not happy. They want to be separated from India and they want to start or have their own country. They want to be separated from India and they want to form their own country. Now, coming to the non-traditional notion of security, which is the modern times. Now, in external or in traditional notion of security, we saw that the threat is to the country. But when we talk about the non-traditional notion of security, we are talking about the threat not to the country, but here the threat is to human existence, threat to mankind. And that is why the non-traditional notion of security is also known as human security and global security. Because when we talk about the threat to human beings, it is not a threat to the human beings or to mankind in one particular country, but this problem is common to human beings all over the world. Okay? So it is also known as global security because this global security implies threat coming from nature, such as global warming. Again, I will do with this in detail later on. Okay? So now there are some sources of threats which has come recently, and that is why we call them as new sources of threat. And this question is very, very important from the examination point of view, the new sources of threats. So which are the new sources of threats? One is terrorism. As we know, terrorism is a major threat to the world today, which we will do again in detail. The second type or the second new source of threat is human rights. And here the human rights can be classified into three. The political rights we have, where freedom of speech, expression, and assemble. And then you have the other social and economic rights. And then you have the rights of the minorities, of the indigenous people. So these are some of the things that we are going to study in detail in this chapter. Let us now move forward with the next subtopic, that is, in detail we are going to study about the external traditional notion of security. So when we talk about the external traditional notion of security, as I told you earlier, here the threat or the source is the other country, that is the military threat. Okay, so the source is the other country, where the other country attacks your country. Now what happens when other country attacks your country? The sovereignty of your country is damaged. Okay, it comes in the way of the sovereignty of the country. Also, the independence of the country is threatened, and of course, the territorial integrity. Okay? So, the military actions of one country damages or comes in the way of the sovereignty, integrity and independence of the country that is attacked. Another reason or another point, what happens when military actions take place? It is not only that the soldiers lose their lives, but also the ordinary men and women, they also lose their lives. So here, not only the soldiers are targeted, but the civilians, ordinary men and women are also targeted. Okay? Now, as I told you earlier, when one particular country attacks your country, you have three choices. One is to surrender. Now, this surrender usually happens if the country is weak. So, if a stronger country attacks a weaker country, the weaker country has no other option because they are not capable to fight back. They have no enough resources to fight back. So, what they do is to surrender. Now, usually this option is not followed by most of the countries because surrendering means what happens? You are losing your status. You will be looked down upon. Okay? So, usually this option is not opted by most of the countries. So, the second option over here is to prevent the war. Now, how can you prevent the war? In order to prevent the war, you have to increase the cost of the war. You have to raise the cost of the war. And how can you raise the cost of the war? You have to increase your military power. Okay? So, you have to increase your military power. What you can do is you have to launch missiles, you have to do the nuclear tests. The best example I can give you over here is that in 1999, India tested or did a nuclear test at Pokhran. That was to show our military capacity, our military power. Immediately, Pakistan reacted with their missile test of Gauri. We did Shakti, they did Gauri. Okay? So, what happens now? This, when you do certain tests, when you launch certain missiles, you are showing to the world your military power. So, looking at your military power, the others get scared and they do not attack you. Okay? And you yourself are aware that if I have this, then other countries also have this much. So, you don't attack and others also will not attack you. In this way, you are preventing the war. And then the third option is to defend the war. Now, how can you defend the war? That is, you have to fight back. You have to fight back and try to defeat the other country. You should see that the objectives of the attacking countries are not fulfilled. So, these are the three basic options that you have before you. Then the third thing is balance of power. Now, what do you mean by balance of power, or how can you balance the power? If you look around in the world, there are so many countries which are very, very strong with good military power, and there are some countries which are very weak. Let us take the example of India. Suppose India has a feeling that this particular country is going to attack us in the future. Let us take the example of USA. So, if India has a feeling that USA is going to attack us in the future, at the same time we know that USA, as far as the military is concerned, is very, very powerful compared to India. So, what India has to do is try to come up in par with USA, if not more than USA, at least in par, so that there is balance of power. If the country is weak, you need not bother much about it. But when the country, the military power is much more than yours, naturally you have to increase your military power to come in balance with them. This is known as balance of power. Okay? And then we have alliance building. Okay? Alliance building. What is the meaning of this alliance building? Alliance building is wherein you form groups. And these alliances are built usually by signing treaties, okay, or agreements, wherein different countries come together and form a group to protect themselves, to defend themselves from the attack of the others. And mind you, if any one country is attacked by the other, that attack will be considered not as an attack on that particular country, but it will be considered as an attack on the entire group. So you are forming this alliance to protect yourself from the others. Now this is totally based on national interest. If the national interest changes, then of course you can also change your alliance. Okay? Now the best example of the alliances we have seen in chapter number 1 and 2 are the alliances which were formed by America, by USA and Soviet Union after the Second World War. Now USA came up with the Western Alliance and they had a military alliance called NATO, whereas the Soviet Union came forward with the Eastern Alliance and they had a military alliance known as the Warsaw Pact. Okay? So here you are trying to protect one group from the other. So this is known as alliance building. Then we move on to the second, that is the internal traditional notion of security. Now, as I told you earlier, when I talk about the internal traditional notion of security, here the threat is not from outside but from within the country. Meaning in your own country you are facing dangers, you are facing threats. So the threats are posed to you, to your government, to the country, within the country. And some of the internal threats, as I told you, are the communal riots, where there are fights between the two different communities. In India, I gave you the example, the riots between the Hindus and the Muslims, which is actually a biggest threat to the country. Then you have the second type of conflict, that is the ethnic conflict, ethnic riots, which are the group conflicts. The best example are the ethnic conflicts that took place in Sri Lanka, where the Sinhalese people, the Sinhalese, they were not happy with the Tamilians. They considered the Tamilians as a threat to them when it came to the job opportunities, when it came to the language. So there was a conflict between the Sinhalese and the Tamilians in Sri Lanka. In India also, if you see, there are ethnic conflicts, and the best example I can give you is the Assam movement, where the Assamese considered the Bengalis as a threat to them because of the job opportunities. So such movements are taking place, conflicts are taking place, which is another threat to the country. It is an internal threat. And then you have the separatist movement, wherein the states within your country are not happy with the government. They want to be separated from the country. They want to have their own country. And the best example in India, what I can give you is about Punjab, Kashmir, Mizoram, Nagaland. These are some of the states who have the separatist movements. They are having the movements in their own states. They want to be separated from India and they want to have their own country. So this is again a biggest threat to the country. Now let us move on to the second kind of right, and that is the non-traditional notion of security. When I talk about the non-traditional notion of security, it means this, we are talking about the threats in modern times. Okay? And here the threats are, or the threat is not to the country, but here the threat is to human beings. And that is why the non-traditional notion of security is also known as human security. Now when I talk about human security, people have to be secured, people have to be protected from attacks. Not only from the foreign attacks, but also from the attacks by their own government. Because if you see around today, people are killed not by the foreign countries, but people are killed by their own governments. So many people die of hunger, die of poverty, floods, famines, earthquakes. People are killed by their own government. So here they have to be secured from their own governments. Okay? So we move on to the next slide, and that is global security. Now when we talk about global security, what do you mean by this? It is a threat coming from nature, okay, such as global warming. Now what has happened because of global warming? Because of global warming, the level of the sea rises. And when the level of the sea rises, there are floods. So many people die because of floods. We have tsunami also has occurred few years back. So these are some of the threats which are coming or the world today is facing, and that is why it is also called as global security. Here it is not the human beings are threatened not in a particular country. The problem is common to the entire world. Almost every country is facing this problem of global warming. Every country is facing the problem of floods, earthquakes. So this is what is known as global security. Then you have also under this global security the problems that are created because of health. What are some of the health problems that the human being are facing today? The health problems like HIV, AIDS, the swine flu, bird flu, and the latest situation today where the whole world is shaken, the pandemic COVID-19. This is the biggest threat to human existence today. So the governments, the organizations, international organizations should work hard to secure the life of the people. Now coming to the new sources of threats, let us deal each one in detail. Some of the new sources of threats, as I told you, the first one is terrorism. Now what is terrorism? Terrorism, it refers to political violence. Terrorism refers to political violence where the civilians are targeted. They are targeted deliberately, purposely, intentionally, and indiscriminately. When you are targeted indiscriminately, or when the target takes place indiscriminately, the terrorists will not see whether you are a man or a woman, whether you are a child or old, whether you are Hindu, Muslim, Sikh. They will not see this. It is done indiscriminately. The best example what I can give you about this terrorism is the attack on the World Trade Center in USA in 2001. Okay? The September 11 attack. So many thousands of people were killed by the terrorists. In India also, if you see in 2008 on 26th of November, the attack by the terrorists at the Chhatrapati Shivaji terminal, how the Taj Hotel was destroyed. So many people lost their lives. These are some of the examples of terrorism which are affecting us today. So these are some of the modern threats. Then you have human rights. Now here the human rights can be classified into three. As I told you earlier, one is the political right, and when we talk about the political right, we talk about the right to freedom of speech, expression, assemble. We have the right to speak. We have the right to express ourselves, and these rights has to be protected. If we are not happy with certain thing, we should be allowed to express. We should be allowed to speak. You cannot take revenge if we express ourselves. So our rights has to be protected. Then you have the second type of right, that is the economic and the social right. When we talk about the economic right, every individual in the world should have the basic necessities of life. Food, clothing, shelter. If these things are not there, you cannot say that you have the economic right. So many people today in the world are dying of poverty. How can we say that we have economic right today? In fact, this right is threatened. And then we talk about the social right, wherein there should be no discrimination as far as the gender is concerned, that is male, female, men and women. There should be no discrimination when it comes to religion, all should be treated equally. There should be no discrimination when it comes to caste, race. There should be equality. So the social right is also very important. And then you have the other right, that is the indigenous rights or the minority rights, where all minorities should be protected. The best example about the minorities in India, if you see the OBCs, the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, so their rights also have to be protected. Okay, so this is about the human rights. We move on to global poverty. All over the world, people are facing poverty. And one main reason of poverty is population. Population is increasing in the world rapidly. If you see the world population today, half of the world's population is there only in 6 countries. And which are the 6 countries which carries half of the population of the world? One is of course China, second one is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria and Indonesia. These are the 6 countries which carries or which has half the population of the world. So what is happening? When population is more and the resources are less, naturally there will be poverty. If you see the northern countries who are very, very rich, they are trying their best to lower the population, to control the population. Whereas if you see the southern countries, what is happening in the southern countries? The population is more, they are not doing anything to control the population, and there is poverty, resources are less. So when there is high per capita income and low population, what is happening is that the rich country becomes more richer and the poor country, because of high population and lower income, the poor becomes poorer. And it is this disparity between the northern and the southern countries of the world which has created a major problem in the world. Now because of poverty, there is also migration. Poverty has led to migration. People move out, they migrate from one place to the other, from one country to the other in search of jobs. So this is again another problem for the world, for the other countries. So migration is happening because of poverty. So people migrate not only in search of jobs, but sometimes because of refugee problem. People have to leave their country either because of war or some other problems. So this is refugee problem is again creating another problem. And then you have again migration taking place because of internal displacements, because of floods, famines, people move from one place to the other. So it is the biggest threat to the world today. And this migration further leads to health epidemics. Now you will ask me, how migration leads to health epidemics? It is because when people migrate from one place to the other, what are they doing? They are carrying with them the diseases that they have. And it is one of the reasons. For example, let us take the example of the recent pandemic COVID-19. We say it started in China, then it went to Italy, and slowly it spread to the entire world. Why did it happen? Because people travel from one place to the other. So when people migrate from one place to the other, what are they doing? They are carrying their diseases to the other countries. So the diseases also spread, and that is why we have so many problems, health problems that are coming up. And it's high time that international organizations and the own countries try to secure the people from these threats, from these attacks. And now we move on to the next subtopic in the chapter, India's security strategy. This is also very important from the examination point of view. Now, when we talk about India's security strategy, what does it mean? What strategy India is following or has followed to protect our country? So one of the strategy that India follows, because in India we are facing both the traditional as well as a non-traditional notion of security. We have faced many military attacks from our neighbors, and we are also having the non-traditional threats also. For example, India was involved in wars with its neighbors. For example, India was involved in war with Pakistan in the year 1947, in 1965, in 1971, and in 1999. Whereas India was involved with a war with China in 1962. So when India has already been involved in the wars and there is a possibility of future wars, what is happening is that we have to build our military. We have to build our military. So this is very important, okay? Because externally, in order to protect yourself from the external threats, we have to protect ourselves by building our military, by strengthening our military. The second strategy that India follows is to strengthen the international institutions. We have to strengthen, we have to support the international institutions. The first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, also supported the UN It looked at the UN as a forum to protect, to settle the conflicts in the world. Prime Minister Nehru also supported the cause of disarmament. He was also against decolonization. So we have to support those institutions who are trying to settle the disputes and trying to work or trying to do their best to control these problems. Then the third strategy that India follows are to meet the security challenges within the country. I told you about the internal problems, the separatist problem. So India has to build its military also and take other necessary action to check the militant groups within the country, because we have problems coming up from some states in India like Punjab, Kashmir, Mizoram, Nagaland. So to deal with such militant groups, we have to build our military and take necessary actions. And then we have the last one. When we talk about the traditional, non-traditional notion of security, India or the government of India is trying its best to solve the problem of poverty. The government of India is trying its best to see that the problem of unemployment is solved. It is trying its best to increase the standard of living of the people, and it is also trying its best to do away with the health problems by securing the life of the people. With this, I come to the end of the chapter. Let us have a brief summary very quickly. We started with the topic security in the contemporary world. We have seen what is security. Security implies freedom from threats, those threats which damages the core values which are beyond repairs. Then we saw that how security is divided into two, that is kinds of securities. We have the traditional notion of security and the non-traditional notion of security. In traditional notion of security, we saw that it is further divided into external and internal. Then in the external, we saw how there are military threats, and then what we should do, how we should have a balance of power, we have three basic choices, that is to surrender, to prevent and to defend, and then the alliance building. And coming to the internal traditional notion of security, we saw how there are internal problems, communal riots, the ethnic conflicts and the separatist movement. Then coming to the non-traditional notion of security, we saw how there are threats to human existence, how there is a threat to the world, the global security because of global warming. And then we saw the new sources of threats like terrorism, human rights, we saw poverty, migration, health epidemics, and then finally what strategy India follows as far as the security is concerned. With this, I have completed my chapter. I hope you have understood the chapter. Thank you so much, and a big thank you to Prudent Media for giving me this opportunity to explain this lesson to you. Thank you.
Prudent Scholars, powered by Lupin Pharmaceuticals.